Welcome, everyone, to the captive audience. It is the 8th of April, or 42 in Trump years, since his inauguration and the beginning of the 2025 legislative session. And I am pleased here to be with one of our great guests, Jeff Eager, who publishes Oregon Roundup on Substack.com. That's OregonRoundup.substack.com. And also is one of the people that has done the great investigative type of work, digging into things and trying to figure out what's going on with many of the corruption scandals in this state, of which there are many, although very few of them ever reach any conclusion. And we're going to talk about that here today. Also, a keen observer of Oregon politics in general, and you have a podcast that you also do on a regular basis as well, and former mayor of Bend. So there's quite a great background and a lot that you can share with us, Jeff. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be back.
So maybe just why don't we start at the top right now? Because if you set the setting for Oregon politics, it is Oregon has come out of the last election with this idea that everything's different here in Oregon because of how the election went. And then there's this stuff at the national level with Donald Trump and the administration, and it's Oregon versus Trump. They took virtually no lessons, it seems, from the way voters felt in 2024. Maybe because they eked out enough wins, they are just pretending like it's their job. The Attorney General, Dan Rayfield, thinks it's his job to just fight the administration. And yet there is this raft of problems that are probably more intense in Oregon than they are almost anywhere else in the country. The cost of living is a problem in this state. The business climate is definitely a problem. The taxes, homelessness, drug addiction, crime, and if you add to that the fact that we're a sanctuary state and I guess damn proud of it, uh, it's sort of the antithesis of what's happening at the national level, and they are all counting on lawsuits and protests are going to just bring the Trump administration's agenda to a screeching halt, and it doesn't seem to be working if I look at what's happened in the courts just this week.
Yeah, that's certainly true. When I saw that, so the outcome of the 2024 election, that Trump had won, and that basically it'd be status quo here in Oregon, with Democrats even adding to their majorities so that they could have a supermajority and pass tax hikes without any Republican votes. I thought we were headed for this kind of dynamic, which is the Democrats in Oregon, starting with Governor Kotek and on down, have shifted their focus when they're trying to come up with excuses for why the state of Oregon, honestly, really, the government of the state of Oregon sucks at everything it does.
Everything.
And
Everything,
so,
even the things they say are really important and they want to be good at. They
yes,
still suck at that.
they're bad at this. Even if you take their terms, and they want to be equitable, they want to help people at the lower end of the income spectrum, they want to help kids learn. They're failing. Even if you just take their stated goals, they're failing at achieving those things. Galactically failing.
Yeah.
Achieving those things, like the worst performance in the country at achieving those things.
Yeah.
And so what they've done is they've pivoted to try to focus on the Trump administration, led by Kotek, and then the Attorney General, Dan Rayfield. Which is the same thing they did last time Trump was president. In my opinion, that was a part of the reason why things got so bad in Oregon is that everyone was super focused on Donald Trump, including a lot of the Oregon news media, to the exclusion of what the state of Oregon was doing.
To the exclusion of Oregon.
Which is exactly, which is making a mess of everything. And Oregonians can't afford for that to happen again. And it'd be great if our elected officials here in Oregon actually focused on the stuff that they say they want to focus on.
Well, I think that, and they're totally banking on the idea that this is some sort of revival of the leftist progressive, uh, mojo, that they've got Donald Trump in office and they're launching protests and it's a midterm and that's when the governor would be running for reelection. They're even starting to announce that she's got a clear path to reelection, which is fascinating because if there's anything that the governor said she was going to do, like the top of her list was building housing of to the tune of 36,000 a year. And there's only one thing that had happened with that. They failed to build housing. And the chief obstacle to that is the government itself. And so, what is she going to run on? Because I know that Kotek has been a little quiet as far as being overtly compared to other governors in the country. Like she says, she's standing for Oregon values, and she's apparently an expert on what that is. Um, and but she's not been really calling out or just taunting the president by name. Probably because it is true, isn't it, that a lot of their plans here in Oregon are still based on a flow of federal money coming in that is drying up rapidly, and accountability that's coming for many things that they've been doing and getting away with in Oregon like nowhere else. They still haven't found the $462 million in emergency housing money that just vanished. Uh, so that you and I, if there is a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, it's like, yeah, we don't have any money actually, and we can't do any emergency housing. Sorry about that. Uh, so they're banking on 2026 being 2018, and I don't know if it's going to shape up that way, because if they actually focus on Oregon's problems, if we can actually get people to think about what's going on here, Democrats are not only not solving it, they're absolutely making it worse with the policies that they're implementing. They're traveling in a diametrically opposite direction of what's happening across the rest of the country nationally. And I think one of the best examples of this is probably they were trying to move a race-based bill through the legislature, which they know is just going to get funding cut off if they were to pass it. You wrote about this.
Yeah, so Oregon, I think probably more than any other state, has, let's say, over the last 10 years, built specific racial preferences into its law. Um, this was done in the name of what our elected leaders call equity. But the way that they have tried to achieve equity is by writing into Oregon statute um, specific preferences for spending, for resource allocation, based on the race of the person who would be receiving those benefits. Um, and it's especially egregious in the education realm, where ODE, Oregon Department of Education, and some other agencies, they manage these scholarship funds basically to allow teachers and administrators to like get schooling that they need in order to be teachers or administrators in theory. Um, this whole regime was created to benefit what Oregon law uh, calls diverse candidates, right? And the definition of diverse is explicitly racial. Like, so it's supposed to benefit people who are black, who are Hispanic, who are Asian, uh, or non-English speakers natively, um, and that's unconstitutional. That has been unconstitutional and illegal under federal law. Hard stop.
Yeah, they're not only not saying that English in this case is the official language, which there's been a executive order to this effect by President Trump, which I think only affects federal implementation of law. But they're saying English sucks. We want other people who can't speak English as their first language, and we're going to prioritize that. I mean,
Yep. Yeah, and it's so what's happened now is that, and I've been writing about this issue about the explicit racial preferences for a while, because honestly, I'm a lawyer. I don't specialize in like discrimination law or whatever, but I was at a loss as to how they justify legally having these explicit racial preferences in the law, and I think the answer is they didn't care, because now that the Trump administration has said you can't do that anymore, and if you do it, if you keep doing it, you're going to lose federal funding, and so now what's happened in the midst of the current legislative session, the Education Committee has been going through and scrubbing the official racial preferences from bills that are moving through the process. Most recently there was this bill HB 3200, which plows some money into some teacher scholarships. The original language has, the diverse language in terms of who's going to receive that money, and then I wrote about that I think it was last week, and that they'd scrubbed it from these other bills, but it's still there in HB 3200. And then the next day they posted an amendment saying it's coming out, or an amendment that would remove the explicit racial stuff from the bill. So that in my mind is a big improvement, because Oregon should not have this racial discrimination written into its statutes, because we have something in the United States called the 14th Amendment, which has the Equal Protection Clause that says, since right after the Civil War, state governments cannot discriminate against people based on race.
yeah.
In my mind, one of the better things that the Trump administration has done so far is to actually try to enforce that constitutional provision and some related federal laws. And now the legislature, and no one, the funny thing is, Kevin, no one's covering this. No
No.
one has written any articles about this except for me. And it's not because I'm any wizard. It's because it is in my mind, it's the biggest kind of like structural change that's happening in this legislative session. And it is the state of Oregon, the Democrats in the state of Oregon saying, okay, fine, Trump, you win this one, which is secondary in my mind. I'm more concerned about the actual language in the law. They're conceding on it. They're caving on it very quickly. And it's a big deal that's happening in this legislative session, and it's a win for fairness and constitutionality.
Well, they're also much more concerned with money than DEI. I think that's the one thing that the Trump administration has hit on, and I think Maine is finding out right now just how stupid that was to decide to be part of the trans resistance to, guarantee that men and boys could play in women and girls sports, which I think that ship has sailed. Like, people don't actually want that by a supermajority across the country, and I actually don't think that's a re-election strategy for the governor or any of the Democrats in this state. They can say what they want about President Trump, but when it comes to delivering what people want, the president has a much better fix on that, even when it comes to Oregon. And by the way, I got a kick out of this House Bill 3200 and the $10 million from the state's corporate activities tax. The corporate activities tax that was going to rein in student success, and it's been nothing but student failure for since its inception, and it's also been business climate failure, which we'll get to in a second. But they they said here that each school district, a percentage of the educators must have, quote, black racial groups of Africa, unquote. So I guess they made sure that an African American like Elon Musk would actually be excluded. They had to stick in the word black because the color of your skin determines whether or not you're actually a good teacher. And so they just apparently they have so many of these bills that they can't even keep track of it. They're spewing DEI everywhere, and this getting the cancer of DEI out of our governmental and legal system, uh, and it is a cancer because it metastasizes and to the point that even the Democrats can't keep track of which bills contain DEI. Um, they it's going to be painful, and there's definitely going to be some radiation to follow up the surgery here. But and then the Democrats do something like this is today's, or actually it's yesterday's headline. Oregon Department of Education eliminates math and literacy programs. I can't think of something that could hurt racial minorities more than eliminating math and literacy, from what the state, which is the chief entity, not the National Department of Education, which they're all losing their minds about that. They're like, oh my God, we're not going to have any education if the Department of Education at the federal level is scuttled, even though it hires no teachers and it doesn't educate anybody. And it costs hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's seen nothing but descending test scores. But I'm looking at this, and they made a conscious decision to just dump the two things that the Trump administration said, this is what you should be focused on when money heads your way from the federal government. And if it's not, and they are spending a lot of money on DEI still in the state government.
Well, they're they are spending money consistent with their true priorities, right? Their true priorities are not teaching kids to read and do math. I think that's clear because
Yeah.
a lot of money per student, among the tops in the country per student, and the test scores repeatedly show that Oregon students are among the worst in the country at reading and math. Um, and this is something that they've said they're focused on, but they're not. I mean, that's the only conclusion you can reach from this stuff, Kevin.
Yeah.
Is that their priorities when it comes to education are to enrich the teachers and public employee unions that fund their campaigns, and to push this, I guess, DEI agenda, which in many cases isn't just DEI; it's just outright blatant racial discrimination in Oregon law.
And it's anti-education.
And anti-education, exactly. And then in the meantime, they're paring back their reading and math offerings, and it you can't believe what they say. And I believe this about all politicians: you can't believe what they say. You have to believe what they do, and it's just obvious that the people that run our education system in the state, starting with our governor, who's also the superintendent of public schools. That's not a priority for them. Reading and math is not a priority for them. And that's, every time we reelect those folks to those positions, we're reelecting people who don't prioritize those things. And we've got the result we asked for.
Yeah, and they actually are talking about a statewide property tax. They're talking about literally any place they can find funding because they're losing federal funding left and right. And and by the way, the Oregon Department of Education blames their actions on math and literacy programs on the loss of $3.5 million in federal government funding. That's not the message the president sent when he said we're going to be terminating funding. He didn't say we're going to terminate funding for that. It's all the other stuff that they're doing that actually doesn't help with math and literacy. And Kotek said she was making a priority of this. So strike two, housing. There was a great article just the other day that said that the more the governor says she's prioritizing construction, the fewer things get built.
Yes.
And then they actually impose more restrictions, like this wildfire stuff has made it so that in some areas they're going to have to build wildfire resistant housing, which like adds 30% to the cost of the stuff that they want to build.
Yep.
And so they don't build it because they can't. No one can afford to do it. And so they're literally fighting against housing,
Yes.
and they're fighting against education and literacy and math, um, and then there's the business climate, which, Democrats are right now trying to hype the idea that there's going to be a recession. They love talking about that because they figure they can just blame Trump for that, right? And tariffs will have some effect on the economy, but it's also a strategy which I think many people are beginning to realize as 50 plus countries come begging to um, remove their own tariffs and negotiate. And literally everybody is contacting them now and making offers that um, all this hand wringing over the economy um, is meant to sour the economy. Great time to maybe buy into the market right now as Democrats try to drive down the stock market as much as they can and blame the president. Well, as they do this, here in Oregon, they're actually the business climate is not good. You wrote about this um, uh, back in end of March about Oregon becoming less competitive, and now they've just proposed a raft of taxes, pretty significant taxes, under the guise that it's supposed to help transportation funding. They had the gall actually to list in their proposal. They were saying, well, we need more money to do the Rose Quarter, I-5 Rose Quarter changes. Well, that's what they said the last time they needed a transportation funding increase, what, in 2018? And they never did it. They
Yeah.
haven't done even a fraction of these programs. And then I learned that they spend somewhere between 20 and 30% of their funding in locales on cleaning up homelessness garbage off highways. Is that what
Really?
you're going to raise taxes to do that?
Well, yeah, and they do that here in Bend, and it's funny. You can see there's a couple overpasses and whatnot that we have here, and you can tell ODOT, like when they go soft on enforcement for a while, the tents start popping back up, and then they come back through and they sweep them out, and it's this big, uh, it's a big to do that blocks part of Highway 97 right through Bend when they do it at one of the off ramps, and it doesn't surprise me that it costs so much money to clear those homeless encampments. Of course, one of the reasons why ODOT keeps spending so much on clearing homeless encampments is that state law makes it very difficult for localities to prevent homeless camping. And that was
Is
a law that was spearheaded by Tina Kotek when she was in the legislature.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean you've got ODOT doing stuff that you would prefer your transportation agency not to do. Um, and they say that this is a back to basics, back to basics, which is the rhetoric that's coming out around these the $2 billion in tax increases for allegedly for transportation that you're referring to, Kevin. Um, they they say it's a back to basics budget that'll focus on maintenance, the nuts and bolts of allowing us to drive around
Potholes
the
and yeah.
state, potholes. And this, I'm glad you brought this up because this relates to what we were just talking about. Do you think that the Democrats who run Oregon really want to make it easier for us to drive around in our gas guzzling vehicles?
They don't want to widen roads. The
No.
minute they decide they want to have a transportation, I mean, the reason why the Rose Quarter didn't move forward is because there was a vociferous opposition in Portland that's anti-roads, anti-cars
Correct.
to
Correct.
stop it. And so as soon as they got challenged, the local and state leaders said, "We surrender. We
Yep.
won't do it."
Yep. These the state, and I'm actually going to be working on a column to this effect, I think today. So you're getting first crack at this, but you can't. Their priorities are not maintaining roads. right? They would prefer us not to be driving on roads. They
Yeah.
used to want us to buy Teslas. They don't. They probably don't want us to buy
I think
Teslas.
they're more likely to install potholes if they could. They'd put them right on
Exactly.
I-5 so that everybody have to do 20 miles an hour and say, I guess I'm just not going to go anywhere.
Exactly. So they've got this transportation agency that says it doesn't have nearly enough money to do the basic maintenance that we all expect to be done. But again, that is an outgrowth of the our leadership focus on doing stuff other than just maintaining the freaking roads, or let alone expanding them when they need to be expanded. They don't want us driving. I mean, they've been explicit about that. They don't want us driving. They think it's killing the environment. So they've acted accordingly, and now they say they need a huge tax hike to do the stuff that they never wanted to do in the first place. And I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah, in 2017, that was a $5.3 billion transportation package. The actual costs have way exceeded even that original estimate. And, uh, you know, and they're way behind in doing any of it. So there's no, and this is the same ODOT, by the way, that admitted to making a $1 billion error in their calculations, thinking they were going to be getting more money from the feds, I think. And they want $2 billion and they made $1 billion error. Talk about rewarding fraud, waste, and abuse. No wonder the Democrats hate Doge, because Doge would say, no way in hell. You're not getting this. You know, we're going to go and actually audit everything you're doing. And boy, would that be a problem for them. But um, they really have backed themselves into a corner in some ways by deciding that this is the way they're going to proceed, and it's all political calculations. Like you said, they don't really care if they and they don't care about the business climate either. That's pretty obvious because um, you know, they say they want to fix homelessness, as Senator Bonham pointed out just today in a newsletter that he sent out. And he's like, how about just focus on treatment instead of these homelessness projects, which just fail. They fail because actually housing first and harm reduction is a failure. And instead focus on stuff that solves the real problems facing the state. And you listed the wide agreement topics that are Oregon's problems: homelessness, affordable housing, drug addiction, and crime. And they're all interrelated, and they all do impact the state's business climate for sure, as does all these taxes that somebody wants to impose. Um, but you know, there is not a concerted, determined effort by the Democrats to address the business climate. Do they think they can just blame Trump for it in 26 and continue to descend down the escalator of economic failure, so they can not only have um, the highest homelessness rates, the highest addiction rates, and the lowest education results? Now they want the economy to maybe sink down to that level, and we can just be at the bottom of everything.
Uh, for decades, Democrats in Oregon have governed as though the economy doesn't matter, that they can do whatever they want with taxes, with regulations, with even quality of life stuff. Homelessness is a business problem, just like it's a quality of life
Yeah.
problem. And that people will still live here and pay taxes here. And um, it hasn't worked that way. And that's why they have to keep. So we had a high tax rate before the Student Success Act, that we brought up the corporate activities tax, that was supposed to solve all our funding problems in perpetuity for education.
Yeah.
It was not.
Yeah, by taxing businesses that may not be making money.
If the strategy that Democrats in Oregon say they pursue, which is we just need to keep Oregon stick to Oregon values. People will still be here. People will still pay taxes here. The right kind of businesses will be here, creating jobs and paying taxes. If that were the case, they wouldn't need to keep running tax increases, right? Because you get, with an income tax rate of around 10% at the top bracket, if it's working, you're going to have more and more income qualifying for that top tax bracket. And revenues are going to increase on their own coming into the state of Oregon, and you can do the stuff you say you want to do. But even that's not enough. And revenues have gone up dramatically in Oregon because our tax rates are so high. But they still say they need more every time. Every session, like, what was their tax increase going to be this time? Well, we knew there was going to be a tax increase, and it's transportation, right? It easily could have been something else.
Well, they know that they can tell people. Everybody knows that transportation is screwed up, especially if you're in areas where there's traffic jams and potholes and lack of road capacity. So people will actually say, "Oh, I think maybe we do need that." So I'm okay with that.
Yep.
But reminding people that they actually don't get anything for the money they pay. That's
No.
that's necessary at this point.
No, and I think that this transportation bill that is in front of the legislature, well, it's not a bill yet. This concept that's in front of the legislature, I think it's a really big deal, big picture wise for Oregon, because what our system of government in Oregon requires is a constantly expanding flow of money into it to pay off the allies of the Democrats who run our state and the people that fund the campaigns of the Democrats who run our state.
Yeah.
That is what the model is based on. And if between legislators and voters, if we can say no, you've screwed up too much stuff, you're not spending the money you get properly, or the results are awful, we're not giving you more money, period, until you start getting your act together. That will get their attention. Just like you mentioned the Trump threat of defunding over DEI stuff. Money is what they run on. And if we cut off the flow, the ever increasing flow of money into their coffers, they will be forced to change course. That's the only thing that's going to force them to change course. So we can't let them just run this huge tax hike through.
Yeah, they've been able to take the economy for granted and yet still sort of lunge forward. But I also think and so there was still growth, there was still expansion, but maybe they've kind of reached, what is it, the Peter principle of their policies, and um, I think because the federal funding is drying up, it's sort of pressing the issue in
Yep.
very, very acutely on them, and it's high time actually. And they're always gonna say they need more money and more time. And if the voters say you're out of time and we're done giving you more money, yeah, it's a squeeze play, but it's what needs to happen. And by the way, Democrats, this is some breaking news. Another Democrat in Oregon state senator, uh, uh, who is it? It's Aaron Woods, has been removed, uh, which I think means that he's been removed from committees where they need to have a vote in order to advance legislation, because he's going to be away from Salem periodically for medical treatments. And they didn't go into more detail on that, but that's in the Senate. And in the House, already Representative Ho Nguyen has been battling stage 4 cancer and has been absent for many votes. So, now I don't doubt the ability of Democrats to just wheel in somebody that's, experiencing severe health issues just to make sure that they can vote. But they do need 18 votes in the Senate. They need 36 in the House to pass taxes without any Republican help. And they just introduced those 10 taxes in the transportation package. They're 90 days away from the hard deadline, the sine die, where they got to get it done. And they're one vote short, which is what they gained in the last election. They're one vote short in each house of the legislature. So maybe the Democrats are even in more of a squeeze play now. I don't know what they're going to do, but God, I hope we don't have Republicans saying, "Hey, I'll help you out."
Yeah, and I think that's a real issue Kevin. I think that barring death, the Democrats will be able to get those people into the chambers to vote if and when the time comes where they need their vote. Um, so I think that the real leverage that we have here is that there is no opportunity for an emergency clause in a tax increase bill.
Right.
So so that means that they have to wait. You might know this. Is it 90 days? Is the soonest you can implement a law that's been passed by the legislature, signed by the governor? Well, maybe it's January 1st of next year. Anyway, there's a lag, and during that lag, there can be a people can do a referendum
They have 90 days to gather
to
the signatures. Yeah.
repeal the tax increase. I think that referendum would pass overwhelmingly if it gets on the ballot. And that's why they're trying to get Republican support for this bill. Assuming that those two members are able to vote, they don't need Republican votes to pass these bills through the legislature. But what they want to avoid is a referendum fight after the thing passes, which they know they'll lose. So they're trying to get enough Republican support so that there's not this kind of unified push to repeal the darn thing once they pass it. That's the game they're playing right now.
Well, and there's another game on another level that they're playing. They just had 36 bills flood into a committee in just hours, I guess, yesterday. And the headline in Oregon Cattle says Ramrod time. And when you look at what these bills are, some of these bills actually look like that they have the same name but different bill numbers. That's usually a sign that they're, like, one of them says requires the Oregon Health Authority to study behavioral health. That's a gut and stuff.
Yes.
They are passing it so they can shove a bunch of things into it that, because it's not really making it through the committee process, or some of the stuff's very unpopular that they're proposing, and they just want to stick it in a Christmas tree bill and maybe then offer some concession to a Republican or two to see if they can't pull them over. And that can be done because leadership can pull these bills to the floor anytime once they get something to stuff it in.
Yep, that's exactly it. And they're doing gut and stuff on these gun bills that they're trying to move. I wrote a piece about gut and stuff bills kind of toward the beginning of the legislative session because everyone knew they were going to do this stuff, and people don't know necessarily what that means. But what it does is it subverts the normal legislative process and hides what the bill's going to be until the people who run the legislature are ready to tell everyone. So it's a way to try to surprise Republican legislators and voters, and not give people the time to really weigh in with their legislators about how they feel about a bill.
And in addition to the business climate, they're chasing people, retirees or near retirees, out of the state because we have a pretty egregious estate tax situation. And so they're actually atrophying their own tax base as they do it. And I don't know, maybe something will move on that, because there's been a pretty good set of bills proposed and a case made, because of $1 million that hasn't been increased in 20 years. And you can just look around the Portland metro area. There's a bunch of people living in homes that are valued now at $1 million who are not independently wealthy. And I should say homes plus the rest of your estate. And that's easily, like a $500,000 house in the Portland metro area is not a mansion at all.
Or in Bend, or Hood River, or Ashland, or numerous other places around the state.
That's right. I see your gut and stuffing article here from the 29th. And so this is what they're starting to do. And they kind of feel like they're just going to get away with it because the media basically doesn't cover this or call it out. They would if it was Republicans doing it. But, and so one of the bills that you commented on here, this is a story that was published on Oregon Roundup. Let's see, wage theft bill equals more costly housing. So this Mark Hester has written this, and It's a bill that's scheduled for a vote today. It's going to add costly red tape and litigation in an effort to make not paying employees illegal, which it already is illegal. How many times have they made things doubly illegal? And clearly, they've got some ulterior motive in doing this.
Oh yeah, it's. I mean, it basically what that bill would do is make prime contractors, so the main contractor on a construction project, liable for a subcontractor's failure to pay the subcontractor's uh, employees, um, which is so it's basically conflating a contractor and a subcontractor. These are separate businesses, and the subcontractors are obviously already on the hook. If they are not paying their employees, then they are subject to this thing. The funniest thing to me, well, I have a weird sense of humor about this stuff, but the Oregon's labor commissioner, Christina Stevenson, said late last year she doesn't even have the resources to prosecute and investigate the wage theft claims they have. She gets right now,
Now, yeah.
and they want to generate more. So now her effort to try to shame her way into more money is running into their effort to create more red tape. The effect of that is ultimately it makes construction work even more expensive in Oregon, and that's directly opposite to what they say they want to do with affordable housing.
Yeah, they say they want to build a bunch of affordable housing, and now they're going to mire the subcontractors and subcontractors in red tape. So they're not going to get more affordable housing. And it's just a continuation of the same stupid stuff they've been doing. Why don't we kind of rotate back here and just revisit some of the corruption scandals of the past? So let's, um, is it, what's the name of the $500,000 uh, donation slash almost turned into a
Yeah,
loan to win the 2022 election?
yeah,
And then I'm also
it
thinking
was kind
about,
of yeah,
yeah, which
yeah.
turned
That's
into a
FTX.
tiny fine,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So there's one aspect of that story that's still kind of hanging out there. So that what you described, Kevin, is the this guy that worked for this cryptocurrency company. His name's Nishad Singh. Company's name is FTX. In 2022, in October, right before the election, gave the Oregon Democratic Party 500 grand. And the Oregon Democratic Party turned around and used that to help elect Tina Kotek governor.
Yep.
He did by a not as comfortable as she would have preferred margin. Um, and and in the middle of that was Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat Oregon, who helped arrange this payment. Um, of course, all the state attorney general, Oregon attorney general, Oregon Secretary of State did nothing about this, even though the Oregon Democratic Party miss. They said that Nishad Singh's bank and not Nishad Singh gave the money, so that it was harder to track where the money came from. FTX goes bankrupt. Major scandal nationally and internationally about the way they were trying to use campaign finance fraud to influence elections, including in Oregon. But it takes Oregon to prosecute Oregon law. Uh, Oregon DOJ says, "No, we're good." Oregon Secretary of State gives them a slap on the wrist, and that's where we stand. But the one thing that's hanging out there, and I might have mentioned this to you last time you had me on, is back in summer of 2023, where this was all kind of coming out, and I was writing about it a bunch. I filed a Federal Election Commission complaint against Ron Wyden for his role in facilitating that contribution. There's a limit. I think the limit's like $25,000 that a federal elected official can like funnel to a state party. He funneled $500,000 to a state party. So I filed an FEC complaint a long time ago. It's still pending, um, which is, in my limited experience, unusual with the Federal Election Commission. And I suspect something is going on with that complaint. And it's still hanging out there. And I check with the FEC every once in a while. They said no, we can't say anything until the commission makes a final determination. Just keep an eye on it. So I've been keeping an eye on it, but um, something's going on with that complaint. I feel pretty strongly about it.
Well, and the DOJ and the FBI under new management, the FEC, I don't know if it's been reconstituted in some way, but I got to believe it's probably tipping in a different direction now politically. And so, and the person that Biden had in charge of it was pretty corrupt, but at the same time, even that person couldn't make this one go away. So it's still there, which means that just going and finding the like discovery on something like this, if it turns into a court case, could actually be very revealing too.
It could. Unfortunately, it won't be a court case, and the FEC is really, really secretive about the way they go about this stuff. I've learned. So the weird thing about not the weird thing, I guess, the sad thing about this is that Biden's spokesman told the Oregonian while all this was going down that he had, quote unquote, he and his office had nothing to do with the contribution, which was even based on what we knew at the time, a flat out lie.
Yeah, it's bald-faced lie because you got the emails, right?
Yeah, we've got the emails that were his people that work for Biden's campaign are right in the middle of getting this money to the Democratic Party of Oregon. And that was all in that Oregonian story that also quoted the Biden spokesman as saying they had nothing to do with it. So I think Biden's in a tough spot because he has publicly taken the position he didn't do something he did. And I think it's a pretty blatant and straightforward violation of federal law. And so I'm sure that there's been extensive discovery between the FEC and Biden's camp. And we'll just see what happens with it when it comes out. I don't know to what degree, if at all, the FEC will make the documents it receives in discovery public. It will make its final determination public.
And then another one of the cases floating out there is Lamoda and the whole thing that went down with that. That one's still alive. The U.S. attorney has been fired, who did actually take forward this case, but was it a Biden appointee? It's pretty common to just clean house and put in new. And there's an acting U.S. attorney. I think it's one of the assistants there. But this case still lives, and the scrutiny that could also fall upon current Congresswoman Val Hoyle, whose communications are certainly the subject of that investigation, continues. And now that there's a DOJ and FBI and soon to be at some point a U.S. attorney in Oregon that is of a different flavor when it comes to scrutinizing corruption scandals, things could get hot in the kitchen for some of the people that are mired in this case.
Yeah, that is the other, that is another shoe to drop when it comes to Oregon politics. That's been hanging out there for a while. There was a similar set of cases in California not long ago, and this where a cannabis company was paying off local officials to get the approvals that they needed. California, of course, didn't do anything about that either, and it took the feds getting involved. And this was, I think the investigation began when Trump was president the first time, and it gives you an idea of how long the federal enforcement process takes. In the last few months, that the feds actually indicted and moved forward, and got a plea deal with these folks. So we're about 2 years behind that California thing. So it may be a while yet before the feds make public what's going on. But the feds typically are known for being very thorough, very secretive, and not sparing the feelings of the people they're investigating and prosecuting at the end of the day.
Well, I will say too that they like to under Biden, they like to see if they could wait out the statute of limitations clock, which I think is like 6 years on a lot of these federal crimes. But in the case of both the um, the Lamoda and uh, any involvement of Val Hoyle, that has not they're not there yet. That wouldn't be until I think 2027, which makes me think that something could move in a time frame relevant to 2026, and it couldn't happen to a nicer congresswoman in that case, who, by the way, was big on Doge until Doge decided to do exactly what they said they were going to do, and then she went back to her progressive roots, and now she goes and does these campaign rallies that they call town halls, where she literally screams about fascism um, and by the way, I don't know um, how they managed to get away with it, but they literally have people foaming at the mouth, uh, seething, many of them senior citizens, though, who think that Social Security is going to be taken away, Medicare is going to be taken away. Uh, the exact opposite is going to be the result of getting rid of fraud, waste, and abuse. But they've been told all of this. And many, many people believe this. And they're marching around saying that a trillionaire is involved in all of this so he can steal millions of dollars from Social Security in the most transparent and obvious way possible, which is just an absurd, absurd assertion. But they have, I think, up in Seattle, they had 25,000 people show up, and Governor Inslee and Pramila Jayapal conducted that rally. They've had somewhere between hundreds and a few thousand show up when Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, and Val Hoyle do the same thing here in Oregon. And it's a thing now. They're convinced that all this stuff's happening. You see the signs that they hold up. They're hewing to a set of messages and then just throwing in profanity with it, demonizing apparently the always unelected federal bureaucracy that serves at the pleasure of the president who is elected,
Yes.
which is implementing the will of the American people who elected him. Nothing could be more democratic, and yet apparently it's unconstitutional and undemocratic.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that the Democrats have discovered the injustice of having unelected bureaucrats do things. Because that's something that Republicans have been complaining about for a long time. And now that there's actually an unelected bureaucrat in the personage of Elon Musk who's looking at cutting government waste, they were somewhat concerned about it.
Yeah, he's dismantling the bureaucratic state, and apparently that being done by an unelected bureaucrat is unconstitutional. All of a sudden, it's a fascinating set of circumstances. One last thing I thought we could just talk about is the breaking news on Friday, and wonder what your thoughts are on Amy Kotek Wilson, the first spouse, the wife of Governor Kotek, suddenly deciding to register as a lobbyist. And then this cover story that was absurd that the Willamette Week put out, that apparently this is all because she testified on one bill in front of the state legislature and no other explanation, which is not a reason to register as a lobbyist, as far as I know. It's speaking once on one bill. Like, anybody can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think one of the legal triggers in Oregon that requires you to register as a lobbyist is you have to have spent like 24 hours working on lobbying activities in the last quarter, or you have to be getting paid. I don't. I mean, I am constantly surprised. But I don't think that Kotek's office is dumb enough to pay Amy Kotek Wilson to lobby on its behalf. I wouldn't say it can't happen. I think more likely they thought she was spending a lot of time lobbying for the governor's office, so she ought to register as a lobbyist. It's I mean, it's farcical. It's it's farcical that they can't let well enough be with Amy Kotek Wilson after she was right in the middle of the worst scandal that Kotek has faced as governor. Kotek actually had to apologize. Although I would say her press conference in which she apologized was completely untruthful
Yeah, it
about
was disingenuous.
what
Yeah.
had happened and what was going to happen. And then, they let enough time go by and they're like, well, maybe no one's paying attention. So let's just have Amy register as a lobbyist for the office. And it it's just a joke. I mean, Amy Kotek Wilson she's a counselor or trained as a counselor. She has suffered from her own mental health and addiction issues in the past. Those are qualifications that many, 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 many thousands of Oregonians have.
Yeah.
The thing that distinguishes her is that she's married to Tina Kotek, and she obviously wants to be front and center in what Governor Kotek is doing, and she keeps reinserting herself, and Kotek keeps letting her reinsert herself, and there's just not a good justification for it, and
Yeah.
it's a weird move.
Governor Kotek seems convinced that her wife is a genius and has a massive impact on public policy and the thought process, which there's no evidence that anything that Governor Kotek is doing even approaches the genius level. So I don't see, the evidence of this. But about, I think, a month ago, um, she brought her wife along to tout for housing and something like that, which again we pointed out is a total failure. Like they're just not building housing and they're creating barriers to it. Uh, I still really don't feel like we got the whole story as to why staff felt like this is so egregious that they had to resign. Like
Yep.
I really haven't heard a story because I mean, when do Democrats that are top staffers in the governor's office leave when that's like the top job to have in this state? Why do you suddenly leave? Um, why would you just suddenly leave about the governor deciding that she wants to, pay or create an office for her wife? It's like I can think of 18 other things these guys should resign over, and I wouldn't have put that in the anywhere in the top 10.
Yeah,
And
no,
they
I totally agree with you, Kevin. We didn't get the whole story. I got a boatload of uh, public records and went through all of them. And there was some really interesting stuff in there, and I reported on it. But there was no like smoking gun about like what was it that triggered the chief of staff and these other top staffers to resign. I think there is more to that story that we still don't know.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Kotek Wilson was a little heavy-handed with some of the staffers, but even then, like, okay, these are hardened, union and um, environmental lobby activists who can
Yeah,
make a lot of money outside of government, but they're not they're not shrinking violets who just can't stand it. They don't need a safe space. That's not this group. These are hardened brass knuckle political operatives, and they there was an exodus. And so, I just think some people aren't that interested in the Democrat side at seeing Kotek Wilson be, or Kotek, I should say, be the nominee and get reelected. There's just a lack of enthusiasm, it seems, right now. But I don't know if that's going to manifest itself in anything. Um, but I would like to think that they're setting themselves up for the worst possible showing they can, given the circumstances that we're anticipating for 2026. What are your final thoughts here on what to expect in the coming weeks and months of the legislature?
well, it'll be this transportation tax bill is probably going to be the main focus from here on out. And like I said, I think it's an opportunity for Oregonians of all political stripes to say, no, you guys are not spending the money we give you wisely. We're not giving you any more, um, and and make a statement in by doing that. That may or may not happen. So I think that's going to be the main focus, honestly, through the end of this session. The Democrats are going to keep doing a bunch of weird bills to the degree that they can to uh, get them through. Uh, but I mean, the silver lining on all this is we are making progress on kind of some of that racial discrimination stuff that's getting plucked out of these bills moving through the legislature. There are Democrats in Oregon are no longer doing whatever they want whenever they want. There is pushback now, not enough and not on a wide enough set of issues, but they do feel pressure from the Trump administration and from the public on stuff, which I think demonstrates that we can change the direction of Oregon if we continue to be smart about attacking things that are just wrong that the Democrats are doing and being persistent about it.
Persistence. In the end, all there is persistence. That's actually a quote from Herbert Hoover, who I know. And even though he lost in 32, he saved the country of Belgium. I didn't know that during World War II. There's a whole story with that guy of how he was maligned but he is known for that one saying. In the end, all there is persistence. So
Which,
that's what we need.
yeah, so that's interesting. And Hoover spent some time in Oregon, I think, before he became president. I think he
Yeah.
lived for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a history. But you know what? Let's plan the future. And I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. Your insights are fantastic. And everyone should go and check out your blog, OregonRoundup.substack.com. Sign up, follow all of the articles because you're going to get stuff you're not getting anywhere else, and it's thorough, well thought out, investigative type of work compared to almost anything out there. It's real journalism. And your podcast, uh, and you'd cover many of these same topics as well. Jeff, thank you again for being on, and we look forward to having you on again as the state legislative process grinds forward and grinds up our prosperity and our education system and expands homelessness, which is not our hope,
No.
but it is our concern.
Yes,
And once again, yeah, really appreciate your time.
all right. Thanks, Kevin. Great to see you.
And thanks everyone for joining here. Please share this with everyone you can. And we'll be back tomorrow night with the next episode of The Captive Audience. Don Anderson will be on and with the latest take that he's got on everything happening here in Oregon and nationally. And we look forward to hearing from Don.